Diana, I got your number from your resume on LinkedIn. My name is Sarah, and I'm an old student of. And like you, we had a relationship. I don't know the circumstances of your relationship with him, but it concerns me to see his behavior continued long after I knew him. I'm curious if you would be willing to talk to me about your experience. If not, I respect that.
Sarah, I am at a loss of words, but also have so much to say. Yes, I would love to talk to you about this. Were you a student in Iowa? This is Diana.
This is Sarah.
And this is Blooming After Grooming, our podcast. All right. Well, shall we podcast?
Bum, ba-da-dum. Podcast. Activate.
Activating the podcast. I actually thought of something instead of asking you how you're doing, because frankly, I just don't care. Just kidding, because we were just talking about it for the last 20 minutes.
Just go fuck yourself.
Because I just don't give a damn. I'm going to tell you a joke instead.
Oh, okay.
How about we do that?
Okay.
And then we'll just get into talking about grooming and sexual abuse.
Woohoo!
What do you call pasta cooked in a hot tub?
Jacuzzi linguine. I got nothing.
Spaghetti.
Oh! This podcast episode brought to you by Dad Jokes. Spaghetti.
Welcome back. Spaghetti, get it?
Oh, we all get it.
Go and forth and tell that joke to everyone you know, dear listeners. But yeah, welcome back to Blooming After Grooming. We are here to bloom,
not groom. Very, very important distinction there. Good job. Yeah, what are we talking about today? What is our itinerary?
Well, today we were going to get into our aha moments today, but I think it could be a good idea for us to start with terminology. I know that we have brought up a number of times already in the few episodes that we have recorded of like, oh, I hate that word, or this doesn't feel like the right word to use. And I also noticed while editing episodes that I don't know, I don't love the way that I'm talking about grooming and assault. For example, like saying something like, oh, talking about this, like, what is this? Just say it, saying it. I feel like I'm not actually using the words grooming, sexual abuse, sexual assault. You're doing a much better job at it, Sarah. But I think part of me is afraid to say the wrong thing still, but also like some things like genuinely just don't feel right. It doesn't feel like the word that I'm using is really describing the feeling, and part of that is because the word just doesn't exist, or the phrase doesn't exist yet. So yeah, I think it is important to talk about words, because words and the way that we phrase things, it really does matter, and really does have an effect on how we also absorb information.
Yeah, and I would also say, I mean, I think it's a good thing just to acknowledge, like, we are both aware that we are recording something that we plan to put out into the world that other people can hear, and trying to have a natural conversation with somebody while also simultaneously trying to remember that fact at the same time is really hard to do. And you're trying to be careful about the words that you choose, not only for our listeners, but for each other. And then, I mean, I know, just even that back of the mind thing of like, I think all survivors have that fear that their abuser is going to come after them, right? And like, even though this is our truth and we're not making stories up, and we're being factual, and we have the legal right to describe what happened to us, like, there is still a part of at least my brain that is very like, okay, am I saying something that could get me in trouble? Am I opening up some can of worms that's going to cause us to get injured again in some way by this person? Or are we saying something that's going to offend somebody because we're not using the right terminology? And I think that fear keeps a lot of people from having hard conversations, and it keeps a lot of people from, engaging in important conversations because nobody likes to feel wrong and nobody likes to have that feeling when you walk away from a conversation and you're like, "Fuck, I didn't handle that great," or "I really wish I hadn't said the thing I just said." So I think it's good to acknowledge it, and again, just I think acknowledge that, like, neither one of us are trying to pretend to be, experts. We're not therapists. We're not, you know, pros of podcasting. I know everyone's shocked to hear it because this has been such a professional podcast.
High quality produce,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, but I think there's also something brave about just acknowledging like, "Hey, we're probably gonna fuck some part of this up, but we still think it's important and we're willing to put ourselves out there and acknowledge when we don't handle things well." And even just acknowledging for yourself, like, I don't like the way that I'm talking about this, right? Or I don't like the way that I'm using this language, I think is a good form of self-reflection, because I know going back through and editing too, there's been stuff that I've said that I'm like, ugh, like I'm being too cautious or ooh, I sound like really intense in that part. Or like, yeah, it's a weird experience recording yourself and then listening to yourself and then trying to continuously record while not thinking about what you sounded like last week is hard to do.
As of now, as of this recording, neither one of us are in school, like, researching any of this or, anything like that. So we just have, like, our lived experience to go off of, and sometimes even the language that you learn on that journey is, like, who came up with those words or,
Mm.
like, who came up with that way to say something. So, I don't know, I think it's a good opportunity. Think about the words that we use when we talk about this specific kind of abuse, this specific kind of child abuse.
Language has been an important part, I think, through therapy, for me, talking to my therapist about naming it and calling it what it was. I know for myself, I used to use different language, right? I used to call it an affair, even though the teacher
Mm.
wasn't married, which I always think that seems like the more classic, like, quote unquote affair, right? Is like one or both people are married. Um, or I would call it a relationship or yeah, I definitely use these terms that were a little bit more like teehee, like I've got a sexy secret, like because that's how it had been presented when it was happening, right? And the way that my brain had chosen to continue to label it as like a form of self-protection. So just that language internalizing, I think it was a huge part of me not processing what happened to me. And then shifting that gear with my therapist of like really calling it what it was and saying grooming or sexual abuse. But yeah, there's also that aspect of there's not a great term besides like power dynamic, right? But like how else do you describe I mean, just I guess it's like, yeah, there's just still things that I feel like don't have a great name yet or like I you and I always struggle with like what do you call it? It's not a relationship. Or I don't want to call it a relationship because it doesn't feel like I want to have it anywhere near a category as other romantic relationships I've had, so then we call it like entanglement or ensnared
Mm.
or trapped and yeah, it's just there's missing dialect, I would say.
I agree. I think calling it, I think that's what I'm finding I'm still afraid to
Mhm.
do, which is kind of wild, like in real time reflecting on it, because I know that I've come a long way in how I have been able to talk about my own experience. I've been interviewed about it. I've talked about it so much in like my personal relationships. And I don't know, it was just so fascinating to me that as I'm listening back on these episodes, that I'm like, why am I tiptoeing around this topic? But I think that is part of one why like I'm actually doing the podcast, is to be able to talk about it, talk about being groomed. See, right there, talk about it. What is it? Talk about being groomed and sexually abused by my high school English teacher, who and how and like how much it really fucked me up for a
Mhm.
while, and the ways that I still feel that, and the things that I've done to hold him and the systems accountable. And so I was just noticing that I'm not fully diving into it. And I think part of it is my own fear, but I think part of it is also just not having yes, like the right words, and partially because maybe those words don't exist, or maybe I don't know. So yeah, that's what we're here to explore today in today's episode about terminology. And I think I know I mentioned this in our next episode because, here at Booming After Grooming, we love to time travel. Part of the docu-series that we're doing right now with the Groom Scroll episodes, Keep This Between Us, there's a scene where Cheryl, the main person that we're following, talks about how each survivor, each person who has been groomed and sexually abused and been taken advantage of in their childhood, there's people are processing and healing in different ways.
Mhm.
And doing that can help inspire change. It can help also um, create vocabulary was one of the examples she gave. So I think that the more that we are able to talk about grooming and sexual abuse and educators taking advantage of their positions of authority, the more that we'll be able to find the right language and hopefully create that language as a society enough that like it actually makes it into where it's like make it into the dictionary and, it
Mhm.
actually becomes part of like our vernacular as a culture.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I've been I think I mentioned it in an episode before, but, uh, even just working with legislators, there's been a handful of bills that, I've talked to subcommittees about changing language because there was one where they were specifically talking about educator misconduct with a student. And I think it was to make it so that anyone found guilty would also be added to the sex offender registry in the state, which, is a good idea. But part of the language of the bill was anybody in a romantic relationship with a student. And I was like, you got to change it. It's not, there's nothing
Mhm.
romantic. I understand what you're trying to say. Call it what it is,
Mm.
sexual relations with a minor or sexual abuse of a minor or sexual assault. Don't call it romantic. It's not fucking romantic.
Yeah.
Like you would never describe if you were writing a bill about rape, you would never call it a romantic, you had a romantic entanglement with this person in an alleyway. You were fucking raped, right? So I think there's these strange um caveats for grooming in people's minds because one person in that situation, not always, like, obviously, you and I had the experience of we thought we were in a romantic relationship, and not everyone who's groomed feels that way. Some people are groomed and they're still scared or they're doing it because they don't know how to, like, say no, and they're not comfortable. But your and I's experience was very much like we were tricked into being told we were in a romantic relationship with somebody. And that's what I told the
Mm.
legislators when I talked to them. I was like, this is grooming language that you're writing into your bill by calling it a romantic relationship. I was told
Yeah.
I was in a romantic relationship by, yeah, my high school English teacher who was sexually assaulting me. And everyone just sat there with like kind of bug eyes, and you could see a bunch of people nodding in the background, like, uh-huh. And they changed it. And so I think that's a really great example of there is true power in language. And it was important enough to the people working on that bill that they changed the verbiage in the bill because of what the messaging is to people who are reading it, including survivors. Like if you come forward and you're trying to, hold your abuser accountable and you're a 16-year-old kid and the law says romantic relationship, that's going to fuck with your head versus
Yeah.
sexual assault. Like that's black and white. That's easy to see. Like that's easy to say like, okay, yes, everyone around me is right. I was sexually assaulted. But if you're seeing paperwork that says romantic relationship, you're going to be thinking, am I suing my boyfriend? Like am I,
Right. Yeah.
like that stuff holds power.
Yeah. I almost wonder if like they were trying to go for like intimate, which
Yes.
also doesn't feel right. Fuck, that's awesome that you basically changed that for the state.
Yeah, and I think and I'm not saying, yeah, they're trying to be assholes or something. I think that it was very much in their minds that's a clear way to say inappropriate of a sexual
Mm,
nature, but I think that's where grooming and a legislative law level is kinda confusing or can be kinda murky is, you can press charges before somebody actually does physically assault somebody, as you should be able to, like, if there's enough documentation that they're trying and they're sending messages that are inappropriate of a sex but again, that's still of a sexual nature. Like, whether or not you touch somebody, if you're sending them photos of yourself, or you're getting them to send photos, or you're sending emails talking about sexual acts, that is still a sexual interaction you're having with that person.
mhm.
So, again, it's like, just call it what it is. You are having a sexual, engagement or in a sexual interaction with a minor. Not romantic.
Yeah,
So, yeah, and I mean, that's a good example of maybe there just needs to be a different word. Like, maybe someone needs to invent a different term that is very specific to, what do you call that? Because I do think it matters. And I think especially to, like, non-believers out there, like, there's a lot of people that think kiddos are lying about this stuff or exaggerating or, they were the dangerous Lolita and kind of sparked everything. I think that language is dangerous, especially with those people, because if it says romantic relationship, they're taking that as, oh, so they're dating. What's the problem
yeah.
with that?
I wonder what other states or districts or have that in their language because often states look to each other when
Mhm.
they're creating new bills and policy and stuff. So I wonder if that's still around. Listeners, let us know. Let us know if you have any idea. Mm, So let's talk about victim and survivor.
Mhm.
Is there one that you prefer to use to describe yourself?
I feel more uncomfortable with the word survivor for some reason because it sounds dramatic to me, and I know that is like a me problem and not a anybody else problem. Um I don't begrudge anyone else for, aligning with that terminology, but for me, it feels yeah, I don't know, it feels weird. I would say if anything, I feel like I survived the 18 years afterwards feels more like an accomplishment than
Mm,
surviving the actual abuse in some way, because I think the mental health fallout of that has been intense and time consuming and financially consuming, but I could see why some people don't really like the terminology victim either because they don't wanna, like, identify as a victim, but at the same time, I feel like that's kind of just a fact, you know? I was a victim of grooming, I was a victim of sexual abuse, like, those are facts in my mind. I don't know, how about you? Do you resonate with one more than the other?
Yeah, I have heard through the process of working with lawyers and the media, I was literally told, like, when you're writing a claim, a legal claim, or you're writing a personal statement using the word victim legally, it helps more than using the word survivor.
Mhm,
And yeah, like you said, like that's also like it's just fact. Like there's a victim, there's a
mhm,
perpetrator. I'm not denying that I'm a victim of anything. It is fact. But I feel like I do resonate more with survivor because well, one, I think, I literally survived. So 16 through
yeah,
25, whatever those many years of my life were, being with him. And I don't know if I've talked a lot about my mental health yet on the episodes, but I have had depression and I've had suicidal ideation and attempts in the past and self injury. And I literally do feel like alcohol abuse, so
mhm,
I really do feel like things could have ended up a lot worse for me,
yeah,
and I really do feel like I did survive that experience. So, I do feel more when I talk about myself and my
mhm.
experience, I call myself a survivor.
Yeah, and I think that makes total sense, and again, I think for me, it just makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel like I sound like it's just a my therapist would be like, very like, "Sarah, Why are you okay with building up other people, but not building up yourself? Um, yeah, I think it's just am too Midwestern or something. Like, it makes me feel like I'm being, like, prideful or braggy to say survivor, but you're right, like, the, um, mental health outcomes and, suicide rates and, just health outcomes for survivors of child sexual abuse are not great. So, I mean, I truly do feel like anybody that can go on to bloom as you and I are survivors and are, strong and, persevering. I was just talking to a friend of mine who also experienced some childhood sexual assault, and listening to her talk about her experience, she was talking about how she didn't start talking about it, for so many years, and then she started going to therapy. But when she's telling me the timeline, she was in her early 20s, and I was like, "Dude, that's really fast actually to be talking about that." And once I told her, the average age of disclosure is like 53 years old for child sexual assault, like, she just looked shocked. And I was like, "You're doing great. Like, you're fucking
Mhm.
doing great. It doesn't feel like it." Like, I know it doesn't feel like it because you're upset and you're still dealing with stuff, which you will be for the rest of your life. But I do think there is something to be said for, um, there is just like an inherent strength that just goes into, I think, surviving something like that. Yeah, I guess I'm fine saying I survived it, but I don't feel comfortable saying I am a survivor. Maybe it's just leftover Destiny's Child, like
You know
Beyonce
you what
vibes from
you
the early 2000s.
like, as in you don't like that
No,
song?
I just
What?
it makes me feel like
I'm a survivor.
I'm gonna make it makes me feel like I'm on a beach wearing camo print, spaghetti strap bikini, and camo pants. Like, I don't know, like, it's a generational problem for me, I guess. Yeah, so maybe there needs to be a word again,
Too
so
funny.
talking about terminology, maybe there needs to be a word between victim and survivor.
You I know now I'm kinda going off script here, but do you think that like, you don't wanna it almost gives him too much
Mm.
importance if you're like if you say that you survived that?
I don't know, I've never really thought about that before. I do struggle with that sometimes. I mean, I think we've talked about that before of, like, and I have people still ask me about that, like, even with this podcast, I have people kinda be like, "Well, aren't you still putting a lot of energy into this person?" Or, like, "Why are you like, you're giving so much of your time and power to this person." I'm like, "First of all, this podcast ain't for that motherfucker, so he ain't getting shit. He's gonna
Yeah.
be super mad about this podcast, if anything." Um, but yeah, I could see that, like, sometimes I think about that even with my artwork because I make a lot of visual art about it, and, there is a part of me that's like, is there some sick part of him that, like, gets off on the idea that I'm, like, obsessing over him and, like, this is the story he's telling himself, and, like, I'm making art about him because I can't get over him or something, versus, like, this is truly just a
Mm,
person working through trauma. Um
yes. And I think it's important too to keep in mind that just respect whatever someone chooses to identify
Mhm,
as, like you were saying, you don't although you might not embrace survivor, you're not critiquing or judging
mm-mm,
anyone for using that to describe themselves. So, yeah, I think best practice is to just use what other people are using to describe themselves.
yeah.
And I know when like I don't think either one of us, if we were to hear either term, would be like, "Oh, how dare you!"
No, no.
So,
No, I think it's more about
but
naming yourself. I think that's where it makes me uncomfortable.
yeah,
Like, if somebody else is like, "Oh, Sarah's a survivor," I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, sure, fine, whatever." But for me to be up, like, if I was up on, like, a stage or something giving, like, a presentation to, educators as continuous education or something, I feel like I would I would, like, hesitate. Like, I feel like I'd be like, "My name is Sarah, and some stuff happened to me." Burp. Like, I don't know, I feel like I would have a hard time with it. But, yeah, so I think it goes back to what you were saying too of naming it, that discomfort. There's still a little bit of that discomfort in there, with the terminology that we're using about our own abuse. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need to invent a glamazon, Wonder Woman-esque term.
although we're doing this podcast and have made great strides in this journey, obviously, like, we are still working through some stuff as well, and I think that's an important reminder for us both. So when you're talking about other people, do you feel like you tend to lean towards referring to like a group as victims or survivors? I feel like I kind of lean more towards
Yeah.
survivors.
Again, I'm fine
'Cause it
calling
just feels weird to
other
call people
yeah, I'm
victims.
fine calling other people survivors. Again, this is a real me problem about myself. This
Okay.
is like this is not Sarah doesn't like this term. This is a me and the way that I see myself problem. Because it does sometimes it makes me uncomfortable. Like I don't know if you've experienced this, but like I've had a lot of people reach out to me since we went public and I started going public about what happened to me, and they've been great conversations. I don't wanna, like, poo-poo on it at all, but, like, I've had so many people reach out to me in the last few years and, like, share their experience of the abuses that they had had that they've never told anybody about, which I think is I've felt very honored to like, hold that space for those people, but then I've had so many people just message and be like, "I'm so proud of you. You're so strong. You're such a hero. Like, you're such a badass." And, like, I can
It
intern
feels weird.
it feels really weird, and I can internalize it to an extent, but I there is a part of me that feels very uncomfortable, which again is a me problem. Like, it is not like you're no one's that's not bad to tell people that. Like, it doesn't, like, hurt me, but I have also tried very hard to be very clear with people. Um, I cry a lot. I have really down days. I don't I am not one to share my dark thoughts on the internet. I tend to be more like showing the like most people, right? Like the lighter side of the world, or I mean, I'll
Mhm.
go off, like I'll have some rants on my social accounts and stuff, but they're still usually coming from a place of determination and power and like fuck this shit and let's call it out and like bop 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 bop. I'm not going on there when I'm feeling like really down and saying, "Well, I didn't get off the couch for 8 hours today, and I've been doom scrolling all day long, and I, am uncomfortable in my own body because of sexual trauma." Like, so I think there's also just I always try to remind people, like, sure, I've done stuff that was hard and did take bravery and did take a lot of strength and determination, but please do not have the misconception that I am not a human being that also has really struggled through this experience. And so I think that's what I have a hard time with, is that I think some people they're only seeing that one side of us, right? Like they're only seeing like badass Diana and Sarah at the press conference looking good in our blazers. They're not seeing, your substance abuse you struggled with. They're not seeing my like literally not leaving my house for 3 months when I first started processing all this stuff. Like, there's just such an underbelly of all of it, um,
Mm.
that I feel like I am always kind of trying to remind people of that when they reach out to me and say nice things, and then I kind of feel like a dick because they're just trying to be nice to me, and I'm like,
It's
"How dare you?"
receiving compliments is if you are skilled at receiving a compliment, please teach us how. Teach us the ways, because it is a skill. I don't know. I it yeah.
Same question back to you, like, yeah, you kinda said that you're comfortable calling other people survivors. Um,
Yeah.
are you okay receiving compliments? Or are you same as me, like feeling kind of weird about it?
Yeah, I do the comparative thing too, where people who are I have a friend who is so sweet, and she sent me like some link about a story, and she said, "You
Mhm.
helped make this change or something," It feels weird, but then part of me has to like remind myself of like, yeah, that's like you would admire someone who did
Yeah.
that. So like why can't you admire yourself? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It is so hard to yeah,
But
to receive those nice words.
the common denominator might be between the two of us is that we were in manipulative relationships with narcissists that tore us down for a
Mhm.
long time. So that might be the
Yeah.
reason you and I do not think that we deserve some of those accolades because I had the same thing after talking to, like, the subcommittees on those bills. And I had, like, a friend be like, "Oh my god, look at you, like, you got a law pass." And I'm like, "Okay, n no." Like, I was like, "I didn't write the bill. I didn't go down and, like, lobby. I spoke for 3 minutes over Zoom on a subcommittee meeting." And she's like, "But dude, if you hadn't, that might not have passed, and if you hadn't,
Mhm.
they would not have changed the language of that bill. That was specifically because of what you said." And I'm just like, "Ugh, I guess." Like, it makes me so like, "Oh
Yeah.
god, you're right, okay." Yeah, I don't know. It's hard being such a badass, Diana. It's a real burden for both of us.
I know. Ugh.
We're both just squirming in our chairs like, "Ugh, terrible."
So, let's talk about the word relationship.
Mhm,
I'm thinking back to, like, that first text, which is, like, our opener
mhm,
to our podcast, where, you use the word relationship because you were very intentional about the language that you used when you
mhm.
reached out to me, and you didn't really know where I was at all in life.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were still dating him, bro. Like, you were listed in an obituary as his longtime girlfriend, so, like, for all I knew, you guys were still together. Like, I kind of assumed you weren't based off of what I could see of your social, but fuck if I know, you know what I mean? I don't know other people's business, so I didn't wanna come at it and be like, "Boop, boop, boop," and you're still, like, living with this guy or something. And then I also was trying to be mindful for the fact of I didn't know definitively if it had started when you were a student. I had a very obvious, educated guess based off of my experience, and even if it hadn't, you were still a former student, so it was sus as hell, and, uh, lastly, it was also just the issue of, shit, it took me 18 years to get to this day where I can see this as clearly as I can see it. I don't know if she's there, and I struggle now that I've gone through what I've gone through of, like, processing everything, and even that first day of kind of having that aha moment sink in, I struggle between wanting to open people's eyes to what is happening around them or what's happened to them, and also really trying to have grace for not pushing people to having to process shit they're not ready to process. And so that was the other thing. I was
Yeah.
really worried about if I was right and you weren't ready to get there, that I was gonna fuck you up. You know what I mean? That I was gonna, like, blow up your world or something.
Mhm.
Because if you didn't know about me, you could have been like, "I was in this relationship with this guy. I loved him. It didn't work out." And you could have thought nothing was wrong with it. And then somebody comes out
Yeah,
of
and
the
then all of a sudden, here you are.
yeah, and then I come out of the fucking woodwork, or shit, dude, you know what I mean? Maybe you're
Yeah.
engaged to the guy. Maybe you're pregnant. I don't know your business. So I was trying to be very
Yeah,
like,
damn girl.
uh
You took a leap of faith hard, which we will talk about in a future episode
Yes, yes, it
about
did.
but yeah, that's so if I remember correctly, and you think I would know it by now listening to our episodes over and over again, um, I believe what you said was like you, I had a
Mhm,
relationship with him and um I think, like we had talked about with the word victim, right? Like it's just a fact. I
mhm.
mean, an abusive relationship is still a
It's true.
relationship. So it is hard. But I think for me, this is where like context and the way that things are said, I think matter because yes, it was a relationship. But I think when people are like, oh, well, you were in a relationship
Mhm.
with this person, right? Versus you were groomed, into a sexually abusive
Yeah.
relationship, I think it really does matter how that word is used, and I think that is super tricky for people who haven't been talking about this for the last 3 to 4 years of their life. So, what are your thoughts on the word relationship and
Yeah.
when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate?
I feel like when I'm in person with people, I do air quotes every time I say relationship. I struggle with it because I do think relationship makes it sound like it's equal partners in a relationship as a normal fucking relationship should be. And then I also feel culturally when you say abusive relationship, people have a very narrow definition of that.
Mhm.
in their minds of
That's so true.
hitting, of physical abuse, right? And so, because we both talked about that too, of like I was in an emotionally abusive relationship. And I feel like I always have to be very clear about that. Like I was in an emotionally abusive relationship with somebody else, not the teacher. But like if I just say abusive, it sounds like I'm saying, well, he beat the shit out of me. And again, there should not be measuring sticks, but like this is the world we
Yeah.
live in. So I feel like that's where I get caught up in not knowing what to call it. It's almost like there needs to be a so to be groomed, it's like you're in a grooming ship, you know? Like there needs to be like another groom station. Like there needs to be some kind of word of like when you are in the thing that they're trying to groom you into. Like they're trying to like they're
Mm.
grooming you to be in what? What is that called? I think that's where I struggle with a term and I think there needs to be like a word for that. And I don't think we're there as a culture.
No, because grooming is so it's so insidious,
Mhm.
it's so invisible.
Mhm.
It's I don't know, insert another I word, but it's very yeah, it's a different kind of manipulation
Mhm.
and abuse, and I do you're so right, I think that and I think I've even mentioned it in one of these episodes that when I was talking with a family member and I was talking about being in an abusive relationship, they were like, "Oh, so, like, he forced you to do things?" And I was like, "Well, let me try to break this down
Yeah.
however I can in, like, this one-minute interaction." So yeah, I think that and when people think of child abuse too, you think of the headlines, the
Mhm.
sensationalized, awful stories of kids locked up in a cabinet and these other things, you don't think about, um, uh, something that's less a child or a kid being, um, someone peeping, tomming them, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, it's still abuse, and it's if anything, it's more common
Mhm.
than the stories that we see, and hear about, but yeah, most abuse is silent, it's invisible,
Mhm.
and it's part of what makes it so easy for pieces of shit to do
Yeah.
and kids and adolescents to not be able to identify or name. Speaking of language, or even, like, name what's
Yeah.
happening.
What if we call it manipulationship? Ooh, that's
Ooh.
probably already a word. If I can think of it, it probably already is a word. But you know what I mean? I feel like that's like a very clear it's a very clear term. Like I feel like you've said that you understand what the person is saying. A manipulationship.
But how would you differentiate that from people how would you now we're just gonna solve all the problems. How would how would we make this so it's, like, specific to
Oh, well then
grooming and not
I think you have to put grooming in there. Then I have to be like a groom Salation. I don't know, you know what I mean? They end up groom in there somehow. But I get what you're saying, yeah, because manipulationship could mean a lot of things, but if you were saying I was groomed into a sexual manipulationship, like, that's pretty fucking clear of, like, where that went to me. Um, yeah, I don't know, I definitely struggle with the term, and I think it almo to me, it makes it sound softer. Like, when you call a relationship, I feel like it softens it in a way, and it makes it sound less problematic, and I think that's what I don't like about it. Like, it just because you talk about, like, "Oh, my relationship with my mom, my relationship with my boyfriend, my relationship with my coworkers," like, those are normal things that you say all day. So if you're saying, "My relationship with my abuser," it sounds like you're sugarcoating it somehow.
Yeah, that's true. Because I guess, like, I'm thinking of, like, when you would use the word relationship to describe a bad one,
Mhm.
like, that, like, you would always have to put a negative adjective,
Mhm.
before relationship, a bad relationship, toxic relationship, not a good relationship.
Yeah.
Is because yeah, so the word relationship kinda does have that, like, inherent, like you said, like, equal
Mhm.
footing.
I
Interesting.
don't think we're gonna solve that problem
Manipulationship.
today, but I like manipulationship. I think it's let's get the kids on the TikTok, just, throw that around, see if it takes. They probably already have a fucking word for this, and we're just so
They
goddamn
prob I
old, and
was
we don't
just
know.
I I was just thinking that they probably already have language for creepy ass teachers in their
They're like, "Yeah, those
school.
are called yeek
Hey, are
they're
you
called yeek yaks, dummies." It's like, I don't know, some fucking weird ass shit we never heard of. Who knows?
are you Gen Z or Gen Alpha? Let us know. Also, talk to a trusted adult about anything you need to process in these episodes. Okay. Are there any I feel like I'm just domineering
No, that's
everything. Are there
fine.
any
No,
words that you
you're
wanna
you
bring up
I
or
think what we've learned in this podcast so far is you are great at asking questions, and I am great at rambling, so it's going great. I tried to think if there's other words. I feel like I stutter a lot on sexual assault versus sexual abuse. I tend to try to use the term abuse over assault because in my mind, I think of assault as a more of a forceful, physical, um, against your will act. And but that's again very much my interpretation of the terminology. So do you feel a certain way about each term, or is there a term you tend to use more?
okay, so according to artificial intelligence, the oh, interesting. The primary legal distinction between sexual assault and sexual abuse is the age and capacity of the victim.
Mm.
Okay, that's important. Sexual assault involves non consensual acts with an adult, while sexual abuse involves acts with a
Oh,
minor
there you
or
go.
someone who cannot legally consent. So we want to be saying
Yep.
abuse if we want to be using legal language,
And I
which I think we should start doing
yeah, and
from
I
now
no,
on.
I mean I do usually try to say abuse, but sometimes assault comes out when I'm talking about it. 'Cause I, again, I think it just goes back to that like I don't want to take terms away from people. Like again, it's that measuring stick thing of like, yes, what happened to me was terrible and awful, but there is still a part of me that very much acknowledges like somebody grabbing you in the dark and forcing you down and raping you on wherever in a bush or on the side of the street. Like to me sounds 1,000 times more horrific and terrifying and awful than what I experienced. So I don't I it's one of those things too where I feel very like I don't ever want to be like using a term that I don't feel like I have the right to be using because I don't want to diminish someone else's experience, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't feel like I have the
It
right
does.
to use that term.
Ooh, but see, I would challenge you so
I
hard because
know.
you would never say that to someone else. And if anything, I feel like you have said to other people, other women, that you do have a right
Diana,
to the word.
do as I say, not as I do.
You
Again.
are so uncomfortable right now. It's so funny
Ah!
to see your body literally like get out of your chair.
Listen, I have acknowledged thrice on this episode I got some shit to work on. Yeah, I don't know. I just yeah, I don't think there should be a measuring stick, but I also want to be careful about not
Yeah.
over uh dramatizing like what happened to me in some because listen, I listen to true crime, so I have heard some horrific shit, and so in my brain I'm like, listen, I was not drugged and assaulted and raped and had my limbs cut off and thrown down a fucking ravine and had to crawl out on my stumps. That didn't happen to me. Like you know what I mean? I'm not on the same level as that person. Like nor
No, that happened to Mary
Mary
Vincent. Read about
Vincent.
her story.
She's a fucking hero, dude. She's a fucking survivor.
Yes.
She's a fucking badass. I'm just, you know what? I think that's
You are too, Sarah.
oh well, thank
You are
you.
too, in different ways. In different ways.
Oh,
You've crawled out of an emotional ravine.
sure.
You have done a lot of work as well. It just looks
It
different. It looks
does. So
different.
yeah, that's my again, these are Sarah's issues that Sarah needs to clearly talk to her therapist about.
um,
My palms are sweating right now just having this
oh my
conversation. Son of a bitch.
Okay, but okay, I hear you, and in some ways, I feel similarly, but I think it helps to know now, as we have learned, saying assault implies that it happened between 2
Mhm.
adults, and abuse is that it was between an adult and someone who can't consent,
Sure.
who is not a consenting age or just cannot consent for whatever reason. So, yeah, that's good to know because I feel like I've also been going back and
Mhm.
forth. So I'm gonna try to just stick with abuse moving forward.
And that's what's hard is that technically the age of consent in different states is different. So if you wanted to real be a fucking nerd about it, you could be like, "Well, you were of an age of consent, so even if you were under 18." But I think the caveat is that in both of our situations, like, it was a person it was a teacher, you know what I mean? It was a person in a position of
Yeah,
power, so that is it
exactly.
is a loophole, in that kind of argument if somebody's trying to make it, um, which is scary because, for us, because it was a teacher who abused us, we were able to go to the state boards of education, to do an investigation. And if he had been a medical professional, we would have been able to go to the medical board. Um, if he'd been a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. But like if you are a youth and you're abused by somebody who does not work within any of those kind of, systems, like big statewide managed systems, and there isn't enough proof for criminal charges, you're fucked. You know what I mean? Like, you can't do anything, and I think that I
Mm,
didn't
yeah.
really, like, think about that until we were really far in our process because somebody had pointed that out, and I was like, "Oh my god, yeah." Like, if he had just been a dude that worked at a gas station, there's no fucking league of gas station
Yeah.
investigators that would have helped us, like, it's a very scary thought, like, there are these whatever, kind of strange loopholes.
Yeah. In Illinois, the age of consent is 17, but, with the exception of if someone is in a position of
Mhm.
authority, so yeah, like a teacher, church person, whatever, then it doesn't matter. So,
Yeah.
like, if I had pictures or video recordings that I had taken on my flip phone in 2008, I would have evidence to, like, put him away,
Mhm.
but I don't. So, someone out there has evidence. I know it, and I am waiting for the day for him to be in
Oh,
jail.
that'd be a good day. That'd be a good day. Yeah, and I can't because the
That'll be an awesome
statute of
day.
limitation has run out in my state, which is why statute limitation laws shouldn't exist. Because as I always say to the legislators when I talk to them, there is no statute of limitation on trauma. Like, I have to deal with this
Yeah.
for the rest of my life, and he should have to deal with what he did for the rest of his life. But one step at a time, Diana, we'll chip away at the system one step at a time.
One podcast episode at a time. Okay, the last term, phrase, concept I think that I want to bring up, so that we don't record 3 hours of material. That the consenting age, as we were
Mm.
just talking about with statute of limitations, 18 through basically up.
Mm,
I feel like there should be a term for that developmental
mm,
period, between the ages of 17 through 23, like, at least 23,
mhm.
where you are especially, like, if you are in a place where there is that power dynamic, whether it's, like, you're in high school or college or entering in your first big
Yeah.
job, that age is still a really developmentally vulnerable age. And I feel like there has to be a term for that and also protection for that age group because it sucks. Like, you turn 18 and you don't get the same kind
Mhm.
of, I guess I should be more specific in talking about abuse in the school systems. Like, once you're 18, it feels like, oh, well, you're 18, you're an adult, you knew what you were
Mhm.
doing, you should have known better, and not really considering, well, what if it's an 18-year-old and a 35-year-old,
Yeah.
like, it just that age is so vulnerable
Mhm.
and has no protections, and so I feel like that just period should have a name and be, like, researched more or, like, talked about more. It's such a, like, funky age because it's like you're a baby deer on your legs, but you're not a baby, you're a baby adult.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that right now it's really up to the establishments and their own policies, right? So a college to have a
Mm,
policy or an employer to have a policy about, you know, dating a superior or something like that. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of the limit of where things are at right now. I know I brought that up with the legislators with the bill that was presented, the one I was just talking about, where they were trying to say that you would be added to the sex offender registry if you had been found guilty of criminal charges. So it's like you would have to already get through a freaking trial and be found guilty, which is you and I both know is like doesn't happen as much as it should because it's hard to prove and a lot of times there isn't a lot of like evidence. Um and then you'd be added to the registry. But they had a caveat in there that said as long as the victim was under 18, but it was specifically about teachers abusing students. And, so I brought up I was talking about my other points in support of the bill, but I said, okay, but also I'd really like to point out that just because a senior turns 18 in the middle of the school year does not mean that they're suddenly not being sexually abused by their teacher. And I said, I
mhm.
turned 18 when I was being abused by my teacher. I used to literally stay the night at his apartment and then drive home and go to school and sit in his class the next morning. Like, that's fucked up on a level
Yeah.
that should not be normalized by anybody. And I mean, they didn't change that part of it because, it was like already halfway through the pipeline of the bill. But like, I always try to make that a really important caveat of like, you cannot suddenly view these kids. And I said, I was like, I was not suddenly wiser the next day because I happened to turn
Honestly.
18.
Like, what is the lot? I
It
just
doesn't make any
and the
sense.
fact that it stands, like, it uphold
It's like, if
I don't
you
get it.
are a student in a public school, end of sentence. Like, because also you've got kids with developmental issues, right? That are
Mhm.
in school a lot longer and can be in school past 18, 19 years old. They have no protect. You know what I mean? So if you're developmentally challenged and you're 19 and you're in school, it's okay for your teacher to sexually abuse you because you're fucking 19. That's wild. Like, that's like you're talking about an even more easy target of a victim, right? Like, that is already a person that is in a compromised position to be taken advantage of, and then there's even less protections for them, and I don't know, I think you're right. I think people just have this very strange line in the sand about 18, and as you and I have both talked about, like, our abuser waited for our 18th birthdays to kinda cross certain thresholds with both of us, which was really strategic on his part and super fucking gross. And these people aren't dumb. That a lot of the people that abuse kids are not stupid. Like, they know enough to be dangerous. Um, so
Mm.
yeah, I don't.
To get away with
Yeah, to get
it.
away with it. And yeah, so I don't know. The age thing is complicated. I also think consent is a tough word for some people because again, I think people have that very black and white. Well, did he hold you down? Oh, then you consented. But that's some, like, old school leftover, like, date rape shit to me, you know what I mean? Where it's like, "Well, did you say
It's still what
no?" And it's
people
like
argue, though. It's still what people think
yeah,
about.
yeah.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point that, I immediately just went to, as a culture, we have to change. We have to think about this age group differently, but that's a pipe dream and, one day maybe. But I think it makes what you're saying, this is why we balance each other out just so well. What you're saying is a great start. And I think that is a good like action piece, if people are interested in helping to create change is check out your school districts,
Mhm,
your colleges. What do they have any policies that protect students, whether it's high school students or college age students, policies that protect students from predators,
mhm.
from adults in positions of power who want to take advantage of a student, of someone who is under their influence. So yeah, I think that That's a great point to make, Sarah, is that before we can do a cultural change, we gotta start somewhere, and your local school district and university, college could be a good place.
Yeah, and I mean, especially getting into the college thing, like, I had somebody, like, in a passing conversation, we were talking about someone who's been accused of, trying to assault a teenage student of theirs. It was a high school teacher, and the person I was talking to was like, "Well, yeah, it's not like they were a college student." Like, somehow implying that it would be okay for a teacher to do the same thing to a student if they were a professor, and I was like, "The fuck?" Like, I was kinda like, "That's a super fucking sus weird thing to say," like, but again, I think it's just that idea of people like, "Oh, well, they're of a certain age," and it's like, dude, it's a fucking abuse of power, and to your point,
Yeah.
like, freshmen in college are the same people as they were 3 months earlier when they were a senior in high school. Like, I think we have this
And some of them sorry, go
no, I
ahead.
just think
I'm
we have this
just
very
being
cultural
silent.
thing of like, "Oh, well, college kids are grown up and they're adults and they can figure" it's like, "Do you remember what you were like in college?"
Yeah, exactly, and some kids are now, like, graduating early and
Mhm.
starting college at 17.
Yeah.
I live in a fantasy world, or I guess, like, I try to strive for the
Yeah.
utopia that is in my fantasy world, and I wish that we spent more time on prevention
Yes.
services, because can you imagine the healthy, functioning adults that could be roaming the world if we prevented, like, so many people, more people than not, have experienced, especially if you're a woman,
Mhm.
abuse, harassment,
Dude, it's
and at
it's
college,
1 in
it's
3.
yeah,
1 in 3 women.
that's too high, it's too much.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think it's okay to live in that utopia world because you know what? Back in the day, thinking, "Wouldn't it be nice if women could vote?" probably sound fucking crazy too. You know what I mean? Like,
You know what? Thank you. Yes, that's so
you gotta
true.
have something to
There
work
we go.
towards. Especially in the hellscape we currently live in. You have to have something to work
Ah.
towards. But yeah, I do think it's a good point. Most school districts, especially if it's a public school, I don't know about private, but as far as public schools go, you should be able to get a hold of their policies and you should be able to review them as a community member. And you don't have to have students that go there like kids. Like, you have the right to ask questions and, push for best practices. And I think that a lot could be done if more people kind of took that interest on a local level. Um, because some of it's just no-brainers. I mean, some of it's, like, really obvious no-brainer shit, and unfortunately, a lot of schools don't have those in their policies until something terrible happens, and even then, I think a lot of times the policies are not enough after those facts. Um,
Mhm.
and prevention, you know I think it takes all parts. I think we need prevention, but we also need better laws for holding people accountable on the back end because also there's just monstrous people in the world and they will do monstrous things to other people. But I think the more that people can be educated about what it looks like, how to name it, how to get help, how to advocate for others, can hopefully stop those people from abusing more than one person or going on for 20 fucking years of abusing people. So I think you need all
Mm.
parts.
It's the last thing for real now that I wanna bring up is because I just remembered there is this term that I've never heard before, so I don't wanna say it's new because I could just be ignorant, I probably am. But I forgot I was listening to some podcast. I wish I could give them credit, I don't remember. But someone mentioned the term undue
Mm.
influence, and I was like, "Ooh, that" oh, yes, it was My Favorite Murder, because I think they were talking about a story where, there's the female victim and there's an older man, and there's that power
Mhm.
dynamic, that age gap, that age difference. And I think it was Karen that mentioned the term undue influence. So I went and looked it up. And it kind of sounds like grooming. I
Mhm.
guess grooming has like those very definitive stages, but it's basically um like having influence over someone who, hold on, I just looked it up. I don't know. I'm trying to recite this by memory. Undue influence is a psychological process by which a person's free will and judgment is supplanted by that of another. Um, or influence by which a person is induced to act otherwise than by their own free will
Mm.
or without adequate attention to the consequences. So, I don't know, that's a new one for
Yeah.
me. Have you ever heard that term?
I mean, I listen to MFM, so I'm sure I heard that same episode. I like to stay up to date. I have. I'm trying to think of if it was also in any of the terminology with the like state boards. I had to go back and look at the rulings that they made because there were some interesting terms that they used on the rulings as well with the state board. That some of them I hadn't really had thought of the terminology they had used in those either. But I think that makes sense. I mean, you have an unreasonable influence on another person and you're using it to manipulate them and get sexual favor out of them, you know? I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's the thing. It's like it is as simple as a person is manipulating you to get sexual gratification and they give 0 fucks for what it will do to you as a human being. I mean,
Yeah.
that's it. That's all it is. Like, is that
Yeah.
fucking simple? Like,
Mhm.
they do not care what will happen to you on the other side because they just want to get their rocks off. Like, that's it. It's, it's,
Yeah, that just
it's
reminded
that
me of,
simple.
s something that Cheryl said in the documentary where she pretty much said that exact same thing of, like, her abuser did not consider at all
Mm-mm,
how what he did was gonna affect her future relationships, her life,
mm-mm.
like, all of it. They really don't.
No, nor in our case has our abuser ever seemed to give a flying fuck. You know, I mean, when he had the
Oh!
audacity to ask me to take down, a public forum about, investigation outcomes about him and ask that I do so in
This
good
bitch.
faith.
Oh!
Good faith of what, bitch?
Wha
Good faith of what?
like,
You've shown me no
I
good
in what
faith.
mental state do you have to be in to feel like I just can't I
No.
cannot imagine. I just, like, where do you think who do you I hate him. I really do.
He is awful. Pretty much like, "You need to do me a favor," is just
It
beyond
ex
pale. It's insane.
beyond,
It's insane.
beyond, like, you've already lied, you've already done nothing but drag out this whole investigation,
Mhm.
like, and now you're gonna take it one step further and be like, "Hey, can you do me the solid?"
Can you
What are you
Hey, it's
thinking?
making it really hard for me to exist because people know what I did, and I'm being held accountable for my
Oh,
own actions, and it's bumming me out. You know what? Here's the deal.
sorry.
Don't be a piece of shit pervert, and that won't happen to you.
Mhm.
Like, we all have to take our lumps,
Yeah.
man. Just go take your lumps. Like, you gotta own your shit. We all got shortcomings, brother. Yours is just particularly bad,
Oh,
you
God.
know? So, I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but I did. Yeah.
I'll always be down for some shit talking on this particularly awful human. Well, Sarah, I know that there are so many other words and phrases and concepts that we could get into, and maybe we'll do a terminology part 2 episode in the future. But yeah, I feel like I learned a couple of things and talked through some questions with you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think we both learned that, terminology makes us both uncomfortable in very different ways. Which is good. I think it's good to, you know, I think it's a good reminder for both of us that we're not, you know, we haven't crossed all of our boxes. We have work to continue to do. And just a good reminder for those listening, yeah, we're still going through it. And I think we probably always will be on some level. And if
Yeah.
they are going through it, to take care of themselves as well. And um, yeah, look out for triggers. Hit the pause button if you have to. We don't ever want to be scraping people's emotional scabs off. So, listen with caution and care.
Listeners, what are your thoughts? Can you think of any words or concepts or phrases that you've heard or that we've said maybe? And like what are some other, if we do a terminology part two, what are some things that we could talk about, or what are some thoughts that you had about the words that we talked about today? There is a really good book that I want to plug. It's called Word by Word: The Secret Life of Dictionaries, and it's by Corey Stamper. And I never thought I would have so much fun reading about words and the dictionary, but it's a really fascinating book about language and how language changes over time and with culture and society. And yeah, if words get used enough, they will make it into the dictionary and they'll make it into, our everyday vocabulary. So, yeah, thank you for listening.
And try to find a way to bloom today.
Find a way to bloom today.
Yeah.
Go off and
Why don't
bloom.
you go bloom yourself, okay?
Bye.
So I could just get it out of the way so that I don't forget to do it because I have attention deficit.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Or should I say, what?
yeah. Or is it, oh shit, forgot to do that.
There you go.
Son of a bitch.